I like that saying that we as human beings are joined more by our suffering than our successes. Not every people are going to succeed in different ways. Some are going to succeed wildly, others not so much. They may not ever in the way they want to. But everyone experiences suffering. Whether it's the loss of a loved one, the disappointment of having career aspirations that aren't fulfilled, disease, health issues. So, I think when those things, I mean, it's never an excuse, right? But it's just something you can look at and you can kind of see and relate. And really, I think those things should engender us with a lot of humility. Like, there but for the grace of God go I, right? So it's very, rather than judging that person necessarily as harshly as we might ordinarily want to, just realizing that, I could be that person, trying to put yourself in their position. And it's not, it's not always easy, but at least, and once again, not justifying the behavior, but putting yourself in that position and kind of understanding where one thing led to another. And that's also valuable because that you can use that to guide your own path in advance for when things might go sideways, and things gonna happen to all of us. It just depends on what scale.
So what are your thoughts or reflections on morality and ethics?
Well, I think really what all that is about for me, it's how we should orient ourselves in the world, right? So I think we focus a lot on behavior, but that is shaped by our state of being. So really, it's those things that lead us towards behavior that is beneficial both for ourselves and also collectively as a society, and steering away from behavior that really leads to degeneration at the personal and collective level as well. So it's really like the rules that guide all of that, and that's kind of how I conceptualize it.
There's an interesting show called Better Call Saul. Have you heard of it before?
I haven't, no.
Okay, so there's the original series is Breaking Bad, and in Breaking Bad,
Okay, I've
there's
definitely heard of
this.
that. Yeah.
Have you seen the TV series?
Yes, I have. Yeah.
Okay, so there's Walter White, and he's this vanilla guy, at least in my words, and he is diagnosed with cancer. This is for those that haven't seen it. It's just an overview, and so he ends up looking to sell meth because he's a chemist teacher. So Better Call Saul is a spin-off from the original TV series Breaking Bad, and in this TV series, it's about the lawyer Saul Goodman, right?
Right.
And Saul Goodman, so this TV series starts from, I guess you could say, the genesis of how he became, or how he came into who he was in Breaking Bad, which was, he was the, again, in my words, the sleazy lawyer that you go to that can cut corners and, and so forth. And so we're watching that TV series lately. And I love the producer of the show. I think it's Vince Gilligan. He has a really good skill at making you feel sorry for someone who's doing something bad, right? Like he switches on the empathy switch and makes you feel, I guess, a little bit like, oh, like you poor thing, like I want to help you, but at the same time you're doing these stupid things. Same with Walter White. So in this TV show, it goes from the starting point of who he was as when he was younger, and like through like little snippets and flashbacks to how he started becoming that individual, or how he came into that. And that individual was someone who would bend the rules, who would pay off someone in the courthouse to slip something in someone's pocket, whatever it might be. And so what's been interesting for me in that TV show is you see how morality and ethics is like kind of like a pitcher plant, right? A pitcher plant is a round cylinder plant that has sugary saliva in it, right? And when a fly goes inside the pitcher plant, it gets sweeter and sweeter as they go deeper and deeper down, not realizing that eventually they get to a certain point where that plant is going to close, it's going to eat the insect.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
the point that I'm making is morality is, I believe, it is a duty, meaning that it almost has to be, and this is taking from a lot from Kant, Immanuel Kant, but that morality is a duty as opposed to like the feeling of like, oh, like I enjoy speaking to people and I enjoy doing the right things, so I'm gonna do it. To me, that's not duty. Duty is where it's like, like you could easily do this one thing to move your life forward, to save yourself inconvenience, and no one will know about it. But it's going to cause you that confliction in your heart. So in this TV series, you see this progression of this individual who went from trying to do the right thing, saying no to things that he knew were bad, but then slowly slipping down into that path of immorality. And I find it very fascinating because I think we all go through that every single day. And there's opportunities that pop up as leaders, as individuals, as business owners, where you can see that one little cut in the corner that could lead you to the outcome that you want. But the trade-off is that kind of weird, incongruent feeling inside your body.
Absolutely. And you can't escape that, right? You're going to have to live with that. You're going to have to feel it. And, going back to the example you used from the show, is that, no one starts out stealing $50 million, right? It starts with doing those small things that are wrong, and then knowing that you can get away with it. And then, of course, your ego, your hubris takes over, and then you go further, 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 until you're in this place where you can't get out of it. Either your internal state of being is being corrupted, or you've lost track of all the lies, the deceit, you're covering your tracks, these sorts of things. And when you look at these shows like with Sam Bankman-Fried with FTX, or you look at Bernie Madoff, real life examples, you see this sort of thing happening all the time, where it's a very slippery slide. And but going back to the example you said before, there's a number of different things that bring people to that place. Like for some, it's necessity. Yeah. And this goes back to the empathetic aspect, where this character is doing things that are wrong, right? But you've still got that human understanding for kind of what led them to that place. So one of it can be necessity, right? Another part can be suffering and adversity. I like that saying that we as human beings are joined more by our suffering than our successes. Not every people are going to succeed in different ways. Some are going to succeed wildly, others not so much. They may not ever in the way they want to. But everyone experiences suffering. Whether it's the loss of a loved one, the disappointment of having career aspirations that aren't fulfilled, disease, health issues. So, I think when those things, it's never an excuse, right? But it's just something you can look at and you can kind of see and relate. And really, I think those things should engender us with a lot of humility. Like, there but for the grace of God go I, right? So it's very, rather than judging that person necessarily as harshly as we might ordinarily want to, just realizing that, I could be that person, trying to put yourself in their position. And it's not, it's not always easy, but at least, and once again, not justifying the behavior, but putting yourself in that position and kind of understanding where one thing led to another, and that's also valuable, because that you can use that to guide your own path in advance for when things might go sideways, and things are gonna happen to all of us. It just depends on what scale, right? So yeah, that's kind of how I look at that situation. But yeah, when you've got directors that can craft a narrative that really can bring you into that character story. Look, another one as well that look, I never watched it, but Dexter, that show about the serial killer.
I watched
right?
it.
Yeah, or even the other one where the villain killing Eve, right? Villanelle, that who's the serial killer in that show. I'm not sure if you've seen that. She's actually quite quirky, somewhat of a likable character, despite the obvious terrible things she does. So it's yeah, it's very very interesting dynamic.
Well, it's almost as if it's short-term thinking, and I say that because from my experience of my short life so far, I'm 29 years old. Everything comes full circle, and just because you can't think of the outcome of how it might come back doesn't mean the outcome of it coming back doesn't exist. Now, what I mean
Absolutely.
in layman's terms is that if you decide to lie about something today, um, you're not necessarily going to get caught in every single case. I mean, maybe you will, but the trade-off is that then you have to micromanage a version of yourself that doesn't otherwise exist if the lie is there. If the lie wasn't there,
And
sorry.
the diminishment of the quality of your life by not being able to speak freely, be freely, and basically having to orient your life around this distorted narrative as well. That's the suffering with trade-off as well.
Absolutely. And I see a lot of men doing this when it comes to attraction and wanting to be attractive to the opposite sex or even the same sex, where they will try to say they're more than what they are to get a desired outcome. And so, and I played this game when I was younger. I think that to a degree we all did, except those who are to a degree holier than thou, and they naturally picked up on these things earlier. But besides the point, where you start to say and do things to get a certain outcome, right, in school, in life, and various things like this. And my experience has always come back to bite me. And again, not in the terms of someone catching me out or pressing me for something, but rather just this feeling of like, who the fuck am I? Like I don't know who I am because I've said and done these things that weren't me and they weren't who I actually am, and I don't feel who I am, and then you lose this sense of self. It's like this: you have this quarter life crisis around who you actually are, and to me, that's what morality is. It's what ethics are. It's like a duty to truth because you're thinking extra long term, meaning that if I do this now, I know in 5 years' time I'm going to be this person over here that's negative as opposed to that person over there that's positive.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, there's a lot in there. And one of the things that I sort of guide my life by, and I talk about it in the book, is that if you look after your character, your reputation takes care of itself. And I think when you're, especially in the age we live in, with social media, with the emphasis on branding, these sorts of things, sometimes the cart can come before the horse in terms of people focusing too much on curating their perception to others, right? So then that becomes more about reputation necessarily than character, because then what gets lost in that is the way that you are in doing the things that you're presenting to the world. Yeah. So yeah, totally understand, where you're coming with that. And a big part of all this for me is really virtues, right? I'm not really one to subscribe by this notion that a person's got to live by their values. I think values are overrated in that respect because I think they're just a subjective expression of your personhood. But I think there is something that's much more core and fundamental to who we are as human beings. So here I'm talking about things such as service, humility, responsibility, purpose, these sorts of things, that love, of course, these sorts of things that in every moment we have the choice whether to align with the core aspect of our being that I would call spirit, right? People call it by a number of different things. You have a choice to stay aligned with that to manifest those virtues, or if you are disconnected from it, either in the moment, which bleeds into, of course, many other moments, because and then you're going to demonstrate things that are antithesis of that. So vice, selfishness, ingratitude, these sorts of things, and we know that those things objectively across humans, regardless of what gender they are, what religion, what political persuasion, leads to some form of suffering or degeneration in their state of well-being, and more collectively in terms of what they feed out into the world. So I think more now than ever, Luke. I think we've really got to get back to that, and that was a real core driver in terms of writing the book, because I think we've just got to a stage where we're just tipping way too far into identitarianism, where
What's that?
how we
Can you
ident
define that? Go for it. Sorry.
Okay, so identitarianism is really just defining yourselves by things that, in the grand scheme of things, are more superficial, right? Whether it's your sex, whether it's your um, gender, race, what you, the political party you're affiliated with, all those things, and they're not ultimate characterizations of who we are, right? And that goes two ways. Obviously, um, you've got people, for example, that are racist, and that is absolutely terrible, right? So they're obviously putting too much value on that in terms of how they discriminate against other people, which is, of course, is wrong. But then you've also got people that, um, you know, you can see they're tied up quite heavily in their race in terms of might be getting political outcomes or social justice outcomes, which you could sort of say you're not coming from the right frame there. So it's an interesting time we live in, but really my core work is just bringing people back to that core dimension of self, living from that place, because on the journey I've taken, that's where all the good stuff in life is. That's I've taken a long winding journey. I'm 45, and yeah, you've kind of got to go through it. And this goes back to what you were saying about whether it's dating, pickup lines and stuff like that. A lot of people are kind of living their life with a philosophy that's pretty much like it's a pickup line. Like they really haven't done that journey of connecting to their core self. So what they're presenting to the world is it's a fiction. It's a distortion of who they are. And then you kind of wonder, well, why is your life not turning out the way that you want it to? Or there's a massive disconnect or a chasm between how other people perceive you and how you feel inside. So you could have everything you kind of think you want, but you're unhappy and unfulfilled as ever. So yeah, that's kind of how I see it.
Hey guys, before we dive deeper into this episode, I just wanted to ask a quick question. Are you over worrying about having to create content? Are you over that nagging feeling telling you that you should be posting today? Or I should have posted yesterday, or I should be more consistent with my content? Well, there's no need to worry anymore, because my business, Personify, we focus on helping leaders to grow an online presence. And we do this through content creation. We have a multi-step process where we do all of the clip selection, the strategizing, the uploading of the content, the copyright of the content, the video editing, the graphic design, a whole lot across all 10 platforms. So if you're a business owner out there, or if you're a leader, or if you're someone who has something to say and you don't have to worry about creating all this content, which by the way can take upwards of 30 hours each week, then let us know. We're here to help. You can reach out to me on the website www.getpersonified.co. It's also in the link below. Peace.
So let me ask you then. So are you saying that the solution to identitarianism is having virtue?
Identitarianism, yeah.
Identitarianism. Is that right?
Oh, identitarianism. Yep. Oh, look, I think it's just getting past those layers. Like, obviously, we live in a world where people are defined by those things, and people shouldn't be defined by their identity characteristics to the extent that they do. But I think a part of the reason why people are looked at through that lens is because we've really lost the heart of understanding who we are and that same core dimension of being in other people, right? So we only relate to them quite superficially. So yeah, I think it is, really, now you can't give to others what you don't have yourself, right? So you really have to make this journey of connecting with this core dimension of being in yourself. And then that's going to transform, once again, being shapes behavior. So once you make that shift within yourself, then that's going to transform how you relate to other people, your relationships with other people, because you're not going to see, and this goes back to your short-termist comment you made before, you're going to recognize the intrinsic dignity of those individuals, and you know that you should not treat them as a means to an end for your own gratification, because that's going to lead to their diminishment, right? Their demeaning. And in some respects, you're also demeaning yourself because you have to live with the diminution of their fundamental dignity and worth. You've exploited that, right, for your own ends. So, and once again, this is where there's that interconnectedness between how we deal with other people. So there's no shortcuts around this, because you're going to have to live with that yourself. So it's a massive compromise that we make when we do that. And of course, you raised it. You can't fool yourself by thinking just because you're doing that unethical thing in a room by yourself, there is no cost to it, because there always is. And the chickens are going to have to come home to roost in the future if they don't do so more immediately, right?
Yeah. So just so I'm understanding what you're saying. So what I'm hearing is that so you can call it identity politics, you can call it identifying with a certain superficial value of who you think you are. Oh, I'm Caucasian, Australian, or I'm black, I'm this or whatever.
Nationalism's another form of that, absolutely. Yeah, where we think, yeah.
So you're saying that is, this is my words, tell me if I'm right here, that is some kind of virtue, but it's a virtue that's not so high up in the totem pole, and it's not going to serve us in the end. Is that what you're saying is the issue here?
Not necessarily virtue. I don't think it's got anything to do with virtue. I just think that basically it's the core of who we are is beyond those things. That's all I'm saying with that. And I think the real manifestation of virtue comes when we go beneath the surface layers of those different forms of identity to live from that, the human spirit or these sorts of things. So that's really all I'm saying in regards to that. It's just, moving past those more superficial layers of identity to really get at the heart of who we are individually and collectively.
And how do you think that we do that? How do we get beyond the surface layer of nationalism and color, race, and things like that?
Okay, correct. I think the key thing is people have to take that journey within themselves. I think it's a spiritual journey. It's a journey of self-discovery. It's a journey of confronting your misperceptions about the world, your biases, your trauma, these sorts of things. It's because that's really you've got to change yourself first before you change how you see the world, how you treat other people. So, and this is the thing. Let's take racism, for example. If you've got a person who's racist, well, you can lecture that person and say they shouldn't do it. Okay, I'm not sure that's going to work or not, right? But that, I believe, and this goes back to what we were saying before, that person who sees the world in that way, thinking that other people who are the same worth as they are lesser because of how they see them, whether they know it or not, they suffer from holding that belief, right? Because then they're going through the world with an us versus them type of worldview, and underpinning that would be some feeling of threat or resentment or whatever that they feel, however they identify, their race or whatever, is under threat. So, I mean, you see this in like, it's quite big in the States at the moment, something like white nationalism. And for example, something that underpins that is what they call the Great Replacement theory, right? So they're thinking that other races are, reproducing at rates that are above what white people are, right? So that obviously feeds into racist type tropes and racism and things like that. But of course, you can see underpinning that is the fear that whatever, how strongly they identify, whether it's in terms of, America or as a Caucasian, living in the States, right? They hold that belief because of the threat that they think other people are posing. When you're living with a threat, like thinking that other people are going to take what you have or, do you harm once they become the majority and you become the minority, okay, that's a terrible way to live. There's a lot of suffering in that if you hold that view, right? So you can't really lecture to people to get them to really reconcile that. Really, the people have to. The person has to come to a space where they recognize their misperceptions are wrong. Okay, then maybe they're subscribing to a conspiracy theory or whatever, And that's led them down a path where they're living in a way that's very dysfunctional, treating other people in a way that's very harmful. And they have to want something better for their lives. I think that's key. People have to want to change. They have to want to become better versions of themselves. And someone might ask, well, why would you do that? Where's the reward? Well, the reward is that once you look at those things, you face them, you reconcile them, you grow, you evolve. That's where the richness of life is. This is where you find integrity, right? So integrity, as I define it in my book, it's a person's ability to create a state of internal and external wholeness, right? You have to have that. And once again, this is going back to the core dimension of who you are. And what you do find is that people that have this internal state of wholeness, they can act as agents of that in the world. When you have people where they have this chaos, this tumultuousness, this dysfunction, this disconnect within themselves, what do they manifest in their behavior in the world? They manifest that same thing, right? So, racists, for example, they perpetuate division because that's what's within them is what is externalized. So it perpetuates that same cycle. And that's where you have the magnification in society of things that reflect people's internal state of being. So we can't escape this. We can't. So the key thing is people have to want to evolve. And look, I think one of the things that brings people to that space is adversity. It's realizing that, what I was doing was wrong. It wasn't working. I want something better for my life. I want something better for the people I care about, whether it's a spouse, whether it's your children. And, those things have a way of kind of shaking you out of how people indulge their own suffering in a way that sort of perpetuates their dysfunction. Like I'll tell you, I've got two kids, 9 and 5. And when I was younger, I've got to be honest, I was quite egocentric, right? Quite egocentric. And what really broke me out of that in the greatest degree possible was obviously, when I got married, and because then obviously you've got to stop thinking so much about yourself and about the other person. Mm-hmm. But then when your children come along, right, it's all about them first. Okay, so you start, a lot of your worldview totally changes, and you just start thinking about, okay, what sort of example am I setting for my kids? How is the world that I'm helping to create going to impact the world that they live in? And then not only that, Luke, you're not only thinking about your kids, you're thinking about the kids who are kids now, but they're going to be in the future, the people they're going to have to deal with, right? They're going to have to cooperate with, collaborate, work with, all those sorts of things. How are they going to do that? So you also have to demonstrate care for them as well. Because if you don't care about the biggest picture possible with all that, that's inevitably going to lead to suffering for the world that your kids have to inhabit. So you can't get around it. You can't get around this. So I think we really have to do that core work of attending to that integration of ourselves and giving that back out to the world in service. I think those are key things.
And do you believe that we can integrate our core self while still having a us versus them kind of mentality or mindset?
It's tough. Because I think, like I talk about in the book, I think that us versus them kind of mentality is very egocentric. But I think as you come to live from the core dimension of who you are, you start thinking in terms of and both, right? Once again, this goes back to this concept of integrity, facilitating wholeness, is that I don't see the world in terms of your gain is my loss, right? I can see it as you gain, beautiful, and those things that you have gained are going to come back into the world and enrich my life as well, and vice versa. So you don't have to see the world as I'm losing as a result of you gaining. Yeah. And I think, in self-help, this is where people talk about things like an abundance mindset. They're not necessarily talking in terms of money, although some of them might be. But I think a big part of that is just realizing, you don't just have to have this us versus them kind of way of seeing the world.
So my belief is, so if we look at some of the research around social psychology, and you look at the history of Homo sapiens, and even before that, chimpanzees and bonobos and things like that. So we've been Homo sapiens, and people might debate this, but as far as literature is concerned, about 200,000 years, right? And from the genesis of that, we have always had and maintained an us versus them mentality. Now, what I mean by this is when there's other tribes or other individuals who are after something that we have, or are looking for something that we have, and they want to take it from us, and there's conflict of those things, it naturally creates an us versus them mentality. Now, so
you're talking about almost like the in-group, out-group biases that social psychologists sort of argue for as well. Yep.
Yeah, so I'm talking about the as far as I can see, the internally, base layer brain, survival brain that naturally has a default to an us versus them way of thinking. Now, so I'm saying this to set something up, which is that when it comes to individuals, in my mind, who, and I'm not saying you're doing this, I'm just purely putting out there for conversation purposes. I'll give you an example, right? In spiritual communities that I've been, spiritual events I've gone to, and communities that I've been seen and been around, they have this utopic version or ideal for the future that looks like if you move beyond the natural survivalistic ways of being as a human and into a state of enlightenment or bliss or love first and various things like that, we enter this new age, as Eckhart Tolle would call it, this new earth, and we are able to have compassion and be present to the moment and move beyond this survival brain. Now, the reason I'm saying this is because I feel that from an evolutionary point of view, we naturally have those behaviors and those ways of being inside of us, and that the solution, or rather a solution or an approach, is to work with those naturally inbuilt mechanisms as opposed to fight against them. Another example of this is, so we look at some of the research around oxytocin. So individuals say, for example, there's a gut bacteria called Lactobacillus rewire, and this bacteria in the stomach allows more oxytocin to be pushed through the body in the most simple terms possible. Now, someone might say, great, so we need to put more Lactobacillus rewire in someone's stomach, which then drives this bacterial growth, which drives oxytocin, then drives more love and all these things. But you look deeper at the research, it also says that from an endocrine point of view, so chemistry in the body, that when we release oxytocin, it helps us bond with our in-group more, but makes us more combative towards out-groups. So to sum this up into a nice little knot, so to speak, or a little present of some sort, would be, as humans, are we doing the right thing by trying to fight against something that's innate in us, or should we find ways to work with it?
Well, I've just got a few things to say on that. I think when we evolve, we can come to see humanity as our in-group, right? So there's that. But also, something I talk about in the book is that one of the virtues I'm talking about, that I talk about, is actualization. So like you touched upon, now people are going to think differently about the source of evolution and these sorts of things, going back long into history. But even though I do talk about spirituality, these sorts of things, and I've got nothing against science, I respect science, and something I do agree is that we have evolved, we will evolve, and I think that's a core part of who we are as human beings, right? So I think in terms of our evolution moving forward, to take the journey that I've talked about, right? that is something that I think we have in front of us. Now, people do it better than others, right? And like, no one's perfect, no one's fully enlightened, these sorts of things. I don't even think in terms of utopia, these sorts of things, because I think we've got, so much work to do. And really shouldn't focus so much on a collective utopia. It should be on doing our individual work, because that's really all we can control, right? But I think our focus really should just be on taking strides in our own life to grow and evolve and to embody these core virtues of humanity, right? And things will inevitably, as previous evidence shows, our history shows, we will take strides in a positive direction in terms of building societies where individuals and as a collective we can flourish. But yeah, I'm definitely not naive enough to think that this is all going to be perfect one day. I mean, I think it boils down to us having to do our own sort of work. But I do think that when we grow and evolve beyond identitarianism, like what I was talking about before, we can come to see and understand that our in-group is humanity. And look, people can say, well, what about animals and stuff like that? In response to that, I'd just say, look, let's just, we've got a lot of stuff going on in the world at the moment. We've got these things going on in the Middle East, Ukraine, just come off the back of COVID. Like, I think we've kind of just got to focus on, okay, how can we get, and other people like Elon Musk want to go to Mars and put a lot of money into resettling there potentially in the future. It's like, well, one, we shouldn't give up on humanity, and two, I really think we've got to focus on how can we make the state of life on this planet a lot better than it is, even though it's great in many respects, but how can we make that much better than the way it is? And I think that requires each of us to do our own work, to grow, evolve, where we can come to a place where we appreciate that humanity is our in-group. Yeah. So, and evolution it's a part of our wiring. Absolutely. Whether you call it a part of our spirit, part of our physical DNA, what have you, it is a part. I don't dispute that. So it's really in terms of working with it, like you said, I totally agree. And we've got to, working with that for me involves doing this core personal work, building communities, building nations, these sorts of things, right? To help facilitate, keep things moving in a positive direction in that respect.
What's interesting, I don't know a situation where unity's happened with a country or with a group of individuals unless there's a common outward version of change, or perhaps in a cross way conquering, right? When it comes to, and I'm not saying these are positive things, it's not at all, but when it came to 9/11, for example, United States was more united than ever before because there was a common enemy. So it almost seems to me that there needs to be a common enemy of some sort. And this is why I'm saying, and I'm bringing up the us versus them frame of thinking, in that we use that, we accept that as a truth, and rather than making it something to run away from, make it something that we work with and create a better story and narrative that leads us to something positive with that mechanism in place. So as an example, if right now there was a bunch of aliens from outer space that try to attack us,
Yes.
Earth would combine together and that would be harmonious to the highest degree possible. So I guess the question is, it's like, what is a story that humans can tell ourselves that allows us to be guided by altruism and by togetherness?
Like, yeah, it's funny you mentioned alien example. That's kind of what I was thinking as you were talking with that. I remember someone saying it, mentioning it in a comedy show I went and saw once upon a time. I think but this is the thing, right? Isn't our suffering enough? Isn't our individual and collective suffering enough?
No.
Living through this,
It's not.
Yeah, well, but this is the thing. I think a part of it is that people, and once again, this goes back to the disconnection that we have to this core dimension of being, is that we really don't feel that pain that we cause ourselves, that we cause others, right? Some people learn it in order to facilitate their personal transformation, right? Or to helping build a better type of society. But I think if we really are willing to look at it, the the suffering and dysfunction that we create when we live in this kind of that space, that should be something that we use to be able to change. So it's a tough one, right? I think, yeah, it's a tough one. But people have got their own journeys to want to take and to want to make things better. But this is the thing: if you've never taken that journey and you don't think there's anything better to live for or live by within yourself in terms of like an ethical code, a way of being, right? If pain and suffering has been your entire life, do you want to change? Some people, and this goes back to now. This goes back to ideas of victimhood. Now, obviously, people who are legitimate victims, love and respect to them, and I've got genuine empathy for that. But you've also got people that find a strong identity in their victimhood, right? And they don't want to let that go because that's a big part of who they are. So you see that they'd much rather keep up that identity, right? Because that's kind of all they've known. They don't know who they would be without that, than to move on to something else. So all these things, these things are convoluted. When you're dealing about things with identity, prompts that make people want to be better versions of themselves, to contribute to a world beyond themselves. These things are difficult, especially if people don't believe that there's a journey like that to be taken. Yeah. So it's a difficult one. But but Luke as well, you've got these things where even you've got people who don't believe in look, I'm not big into religion, but you've got people that don't believe in God or a higher power or something. When they have shit happen to them in their lives, right? They're going to pray to something, right? They're going to reach out for something beyond themselves to help them through that time that they are experiencing. So what's that internal impulse that leads them there, besides their mind not believing in that thing that they're directing their prayers to, their thoughts to at that time? That's worth thinking about as well. What's that impulse? So,
well, I believe that I'm working through the idea of, do people care more about having a common enemy, or do they care more about common suffering? Now, what I mean by that is, if your brothers and sisters next to you are suffering, but there's an enemy in front of you, what are you more motivated to push towards? Or what are you more motivated to take action on? To me, it appears that people are more interested in having a common enemy than to healing people around them. Now, the reason behind this, I mean, it's super complex, and it's a conversation that could last decades. There's the layer of, is the lack of human connection around actually seeing suffering and seeing what people are going through, which is, a screen in front of you, seeing things, and instantly your thought is, oh, that's not happening in real life. That's not happening here. Or you see someone on social media and it's like, that's a fabricated version of who someone is. Is that influencing how we're seeing the world to a degree that it's almost impossible for us to, well, not impossible, but it's harder for us to empathize? An example of this, right? So contemplation, the idea that, not the idea, but the practice of letting your mind drift and wander, daydream, for example, daydreaming. We're doing this less, it appears, because we're spending so much time stimulated, and that stimulation, the short attention span, doesn't lend itself to complex compassion, meaning the compassion it takes to really think through someone's suffering. So I feel like the problem is multi-layered and multi-pronged, and to a degree that's
Definitely.
It's so complicated. Then also on top of that as well, we have a hard time even defining what the issue is. So what is the real biggest threat in the world right now? So we look at some of the stuff from Bjorn Lomborg, which talks about where he talks about some of the pressing problems and how climate change isn't even close to the top of the.
And how to most efficiently deal with them. Yeah, I've heard of his work.
Yeah,
definitely.
so there's so many layers to this, and I feel. What do you? I mean, it's a question I have for you. Is like, what do you feel like if there was one thing, and it's so hard to answer, but just for fun, not for fun, but rather just for curiosity. What is the one thing that we need to do as a civilization or as team humanity, as one might put it, to push life, to make life a happier, more enjoyable experience? Is that even the right goal? I don't know, but you get my point. What is one thing you think is the most highest return for us to focus on, a problem that we're experiencing in the world right now?
Wow. Okay. Yeah. I think, without sounding evasive, I think the core thing, it's really to do this work, because once again, this shapes
What specific work?
how we do the core inner work, right? So I think because I think this shapes everything. So if you look at it in the context of war, right? If the focus isn't on opposing other people, defeating other people, whether it's for acquiring their resources, acquiring their land, these sorts of things, right? If the focus isn't on that, okay, then you don't have to have that mentality, right?
Can I just chime in there quickly?
Because
So when you say inner work, like, let's get really, if you don't mind, just really specific on what is inner work. Like, give me some examples. You mean seeing a psychologist? Do you mean doing body work? Do you mean healing a trauma? Like, what is it specifically when you say inner work?
I think healing trauma, I think that's definitely a big one. I think when you're looking at things so really connecting to this core dimension of who people are, there's a number of different practices that you can use for that. Things like meditation is really, really useful. Journaling's very, very useful, right? Because it can you can get your thoughts out on paper, and from that you can distinguish. And once again, all this stuff I'm talking about is things I've done on my own journey, right? So I have lived experience of the stuff that I'm talking about. So it's, you get your thoughts out on paper to be able to see how or how not, how you're viewing the world is correct in terms of how the world actually works, right? And how you see other people. Or you might, for example, you might see how your pain is talking to you through your journaling, and how that's impacting, how you see the world, those sorts of things. So I think journaling is really important. Having things like gratitude, I think is really, really important. Now, all these things seem to be things like spiritual practices that really, one particular type of religion, even though I think a lot of religion mirrors spirituality, no particular type of religion has all the answers or has the right things. And this goes back to, but I think there also has to be these fundamental needs that are met. Going back to, if you look at, say, for example, Abraham Maslow and the hierarchy of needs. Okay, so when we're talking about things like, and this is something I probably should have made clear a bit earlier on, when we are talking about things like evolving, doing inner work, it's very hard to do that core work if people don't have a house to live in. They don't have enough food to eat, right? They don't have that security, because you need those things as a foundational block, right? To build societies where people feel they've got those core needs met, to be able to get to a stage where they're thinking about something like social cohesion, like how they can contribute to a society, how they can contribute to make things better, right? So it's very, very hard to start thinking about service and giving to the world when you yourself are in a state of privation, right? So this is where one thing feeds into another. So yeah, and it's very, very complex. There's a lot of levels to it, and a lot of these questions are things that I'm thinking about for a book I'm going to start writing shortly about natural law, which is a type of legal philosophy. So yeah, there's a lot there, and really, we talked about shortcuts before, and I think I think inevitably it is a shortcut when we start focusing on different things that need to be done in the world, although those issues are very, very pressing and they're important. But how far are we really going to go if we're just taking action on those things without doing the fundamental work, right, of developing, evolving ourselves to make sure that that's sustainable moving forward, and this is where it's, and I've heard a good example of this is, I've heard different people make this sort of argument in relation to climate change, where they're saying that, well, one of the best ways that you alleviate climate change is you increase the prosperity in poorer countries, right? So those individuals
Not caring about the environment.
Start caring about the environment a lot more, right? And because when you're in a state of privation, you're not caring about what you're killing or what fuel you're burning, okay, whether it's wood, whether it's dung or whatever, to be able to live from day to day. This is the thing, right? How can you care about the future when you're living day to day? Yep, because you're just looking at the ground. That's all you're focusing on. You're not looking at the future.
It's breaking Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
You're not looking over the horizon. Yep. So you've got those levels to it, and you can't circumvent those levels ultimately. So meeting those needs, it's a complex thing. And then of course you've got, I like that saying of Thomas Saul, there are no solutions, there's only trade-offs. And there's a lot of truth in that. There's a lot of truth. You can think you're solving something over here, but what's that taking away from something that has to be solved over there? And this goes back to Lomberg's work, that we've got a whole range of different things that need to be solved, and how you put those into a hierarchy, it's a difficult thing, because people see those things as different priorities based on what their own experience is, what their own ideology is, beliefs. So it is difficult to coordinate that type of activity. Totally.
Yeah, it is very, very complex. I think that there's context always applies to the content, and I think that's a much, much larger conversation. I have a question for you, if you don't mind answering, around a current moral conundrum that I'm having around what is wrong and what's right. Would you be interested if I share the situation and have your thoughts on it?
Absolutely.
Yeah, cool. Actually, what might be good is just so you're currently a lecturer lecturing law at Curtis University, is that right?
Yes, Curtin University in Perth. So the unit, I teach in a unit that talks about law, marketing, and economics, and how they work from a systems perspective. Yes.
Cool. Okay, so let me ask this question. So I'm in the marketing business, right? Now, a part of what I believe to be my job as a marketer is to create a narrative, create a story around something, right? Now, the issue with marketing, or with any profession, that is, I believe, even law and whatever, carpentry, there's a whole bunch of them, that you're always staring at the face of doing something. Like I said before, you're staring at the face of doing something that you probably maybe shouldn't do. And what's right, what's wrong. It's very clear, right? It's like, okay, that's wrong, that's a lie, I'm not gonna do that. Or this is right, this is the truth, and I'm gonna do that, right? So then you have sometimes, and this is where, in my opinion, what the law is, it's, if you're a lawmaker, I think it's about defining what is ethical and what's moral. If you're a lawyer, then you're debating on what someone has prescribed as, moral and ethical. There's a whole...
Or things such as interpretations of how the law should apply to a particular situation.
Thank you. Exactly. So the situation I feel I'm in right now is a question of what is ethical and what is moral in the situation. So the situation is, let me just unpack it for a bit. And I think it's good for the listeners to hear, because it's an exercise in observing something that is perhaps complex, and perhaps I'm making it complex because maybe I don't want to do one thing. So anyway, so the situation is, and it's very nuanced, but when it comes to YouTube content, for example, right, you have the goal of a title in a YouTube thumbnail, at least the goal that I believe should be had to drive click-throughs and to drive reach and to drive interest in the video, is to provoke curiosity, right? So imagine you have a thumbnail, right? And the thumbnail is, and then for those listening as well to describe it, the thumbnail might have, this is the one thing you can do. And like say 3 tips to heal your gut health, whatever it is. And it says in the thumbnail, do this one thing. Now, the feeling that if someone feels 9 out of 10 curiosity, they're more likely to click on that video or to want to watch it. If the video is 0 curiosity, they're less likely to click on it and watch it, which means they don't get the content there. So the common justification, I'm not saying this is what is happening here because I'm still unclear about it, is that you might be able to do what is necessary to get someone to click through and maybe exaggerate some truths or exaggerate some certain elements of the video or the title to then get people into the content, which is then providing them with some value, right? So the issue that I'm having at the moment is, and it's coming up because of a book that I read by Immanuel Kant. And one of the sections there, my interpretation of it was around, he says, this is paraphrasing a bunch, but my interpretation of what one of the things that he said was, or the takeaway I got was, that to be a good human is to provide someone with all the information that they require, right? So, if I am going to sell you something, it's like, yep, here's the negatives, here's the positives, here's what I've done to counteract the negatives. Here's what I might do, here's what you might do. I currently don't use this product, and here's why. Do what you wish, do what you feel is best, right? Now, when it comes to these thumbnails, when I do provoke curiosity, when the curiosity is 8 out of 10 or more, and I do that through, do these 3 things, and then I leave some space between, what are those 3 things? What are you talking about? Curiosity, right? And then it conflicts with the Immanuel Kant book that I read, the Metaphysics of Morality, around providing someone with all information. Now, the hard part of this is that it's difficult to give people all information on a thumbnail and a title, so naturally there's going to be some space left. So I guess the question is, in my attempt to explain this, is do you think maximizing curiosity at the expense of leaving information out, because one, you can't put information in there anyways, but provoking as much curiosity as possible within the realms of containing what the actual video is about, do you think that's ethical? And if it's not, where do you think it might not be ethical?
Yeah, great question. And look, I think we also have to acknowledge that for these social media platforms, right, the incentives that the algorithm kind of pushes are not always healthy, right, or conducive to actually saying the truth of what you're trying to post and things with that. So I think there is a tension. I think the core thing, right, is that, okay, so if we're talking about YouTube, for example, I think most reasonable people would realize that if they're clicking on the type of video you're describing, it's not going to have every piece of information that they need to around that whole thing that you're talking about, right? So I guess what you've really got to focus on, if I was in your position, is one, making sure you don't misrepresent anything, okay? Because you see plenty of this on social media, is that the title says one thing, the video is another, and they're just interested in you clicking on that, right, to go through, but there's a clear misrepresentation, okay? Okay, so, and then the question then becomes how you actually phrase the wording of that thumbnail, right? So is it?
I'll give you an example right now. Would you mind?
Yep, right. So the difference between, okay.
No, sorry. I'm saying, can I give you an example? Like show you on the screen now an example?
Oh, sorry. I thought you wanted an example from me. Okay, go ahead.
So okay, I'm just going to explain to those listening as well. So here's a thumbnail I created for one of my videos, right? And so it's with Dr. William Davis, and we spoke about gut health. Can you see my screen, by the way, just quickly? Okay,
I can.
So this one here, for example, is one that I released about a day ago. And so what I did here was intentional. So the first thing is I told someone what the video is about. It's actually about 3 things you can do to improve your gut health. He mentions 3 things in there. It's with Dr. William Davis. But what I did in the thumbnail is I then it's something that he commented on, that he quoted in the video, eat blurred out. So I blurred that out intentionally, foods. He says in the video, eat fermented foods, right? But I blur that out to provoke curiosity. Do you think that's unethical?
I think, the core thing is, if that's something that he's saying, right, I would say you should give full context, because provided he's an expert, which I trust he is, right, the full context of what he's saying is what will provide the benefit to the person who wants to go in there and view it, right? Now, this is the thing. If he's, in my opinion, if I'm looking at that and I'm interested, eating food is quite generic. I think there's more value for a potential person that wants to have a tip there into having the full context of what he said. If it's like eat fermented food, and if that's what he said, so I think that is what actually adds value to a person, because that's, eating food's quite a generic thing, right? So I would fully represent what he's saying.
Just quickly, if you don't mind,
in the title.
Just chime in quickly. So the reason he said eat fermented foods, but the blurring out section was to basically say to the viewer, eat, and then hide the actual foods. So they watch the video. It's like, oh, okay, eat what foods?
Okay, yeah. I don't see a problem with that. And if you go back, I think I was, before you started talking, I was looking at the actual title of that video, and I like the way. Could you go back to the screen there? So you've said 3 things you could do to improve your gut health. You're not making it's a very measured statement, like to improve. You're not saying 3 things you can do to heal your gut problems. You're not saying that. Like it's very measured with that. And like I don't see any problem with this. Is the thing as well, right? This is the thing as well, Luke. I don't think there's anything wrong. You're offering this. It's free information that is valuable. Okay, so have you heard of the concept of puffery at law?
No, I haven't. Please do tell me.
Okay, this would be good for you to know. All right, so if you're advertising goods or services at law, you can, to a certain extent, exaggerate some of the properties of those goods and services you are selling or spruiking to entice people to want to buy them. The line, so if you do that, people come and buy it, you are not going to be legally liable for the things you say as puffery. The problem comes when you misrepresent, right? You misrepresent the properties of what that good or services can do. And that misrepresentation is the basis of why that person has come in and made that purchasing decision, right? Because clearly it's kind of like a bait and switch. You're giving them something quite different to what it is you're promising. Because when you start making representations, that's promissory, right? So if you're making promises to the market that you can't keep, liability is going to attach. However, the law also understands that in the market, what the game is, in essence, is saying things to make your goods and services appear in the best light to get people to want to come in and purchase them, right? So, if we're talking about does the law set a moral line about what's right and wrong? If you're engaging in puffery, what you're doing is not wrong. If you are misrepresenting things, making promissory statements, like, for example, if I said, do these 3 things to heal your gut health, and it's like, that's not how it goes, that's misrepresenting something. Now, that would basically just be misinformation if that's what you're doing. And there's a whole bunch of that stuff out there. So whether that's legally actionable, that's another thing. But it definitely would be legally actionable if you're selling goods and services on the basis of those products and they can't deliver. And this is where, for example, there's such a lot of discussion at the moment around supplements. Like if you go, I'm sure, you seem to me like an optimizing type guy, right? I'm sure you look at different things. Look, a guy who gets criticized about this a lot is someone like Andrew Huberman, right? He's obviously he spruiks things like supplements for his thing. I'm not sure if he's got like shares in them or whatever, and sort of makes all these claims in relation to them. Well, a lot of supplements, there's claims made about them, right? But there isn't necessarily a regulatory mechanism that guarantees their efficacy in the same way that you do for medicine, okay? Because you've got that process where I think it's the Federal Drug Administration. They've got to approve in the States. They've got to approve, right, that these medicines actually say what they're going to do before they actually are able to be released on the market legally. The supplements don't have that same regulation. So what you do get is you get a lot of people spruiking these things. And this is where you see some weird stuff getting advertised, right? Saying it's got these health benefits, but you don't have the, those are highly debatable. You don't have studies that are backing them up, right? So this is where people call and say, okay, there has to be greater regulation around this. And life coaching is another one. So without wanting to deviate too much from that, you know, the core thing really is ensuring that knowing what the law says in that space and not going above and beyond that in what you're claiming, that's promissory or that's misrepresenting the essence of what it is you're trying to say. So me personally, I don't have an ethical issue with you blurring out fermented, because you're not imposing a cost on the person who's looking at the thumbnail. You're providing free content. They can go in there, right? Yes, there's a time cost, okay, but a time cost isn't actionable at law, right? But trying to entice people to come in and view your content, I don't see a problem with it. Provided it's not misrepresenting anything, I don't see a problem with it, personally.
Okay, so from a law point of view and from a moral point of view, you think that's okay?
I do. Yeah, I do. Now, but you know, in the course of my answer, I've also said a number of ways where it would go wrong, where I think it would overstep some bounds in terms of it not being reflective of the truth of what you're trying to get across.
Gotcha. That's awesome. Cool. That's great, because I really want to know that, and I think it's good for everyone to hear an example of that.
It's good you understand that concept of puffery as well. That's also really important for anyone who does what you do to understand as well.
Absolutely. So tell us about the book. We'll wrap this up, but I want to hear about the book first. And for those listening, tell us a bit about the book and where people can find it and all that jazz.
Yeah, thank you. So my book was released in August last year. It's called Calling New Leaders, How Living Your Calling Will Make You an Inspired Leader of the Modern World. So it was published with Central West Publishing. The cheapest way you can acquire the book is to go on their website, so centralwestpublishing.com. And the book is a mainstream version of my PhD study. So I've got empirical data behind the stuff I talk about in the book. Anyone who is interested in connecting with and living their life purpose, which is an aspect of what I've been talking about throughout this discussion, where reconnecting with this core dimension of self, anyone who's interested in taking that journey will find a lot of great value in the book. And as well, anyone that wants to develop their leadership capacity, because what the book basically says is that, and there's signposts, there's evidence, there's quotes from respondents, the people I interviewed, showing how individuals who live their life purpose naturally manifest a type of leadership. You can call it virtuous leadership, you can call it conscious leadership, as a result of taking that journey. So one of the quotes I love from the book is that when you think about it, leadership is the peak of the personal development journey. We can look at this through Maslow, right? Is that what's the top of his pyramid, his hierarchy of needs? What's at the top? Self-actualization, right? Anything at the bottom levels, right? You're really meeting your own needs. The focus is you. But while you're focusing on you, you can't really stand outside of yourself to meet other people's needs to be able to lead them forward, right? So it's really evolving, growing yourself, to be able to embody this integrity, which is what I was talking about before, this state of wholeness, bring it to the world. I've got a whole bunch of other virtues that I talk about and how they relate to this journey to reconnecting with the core dimension of yourself and how that's embodied in a leadership context. So that's the book.
Fantastic.
Yep.
Christian, thanks for sharing. And anyone who wants to get that book, I'll put in the notes below in either the podcast, which is the audio version, or in the YouTube video just down below. So Christian, thanks for joining, and I appreciate you coming on.
Thanks so much for that, Luke, and I've appreciated the chat.
Thank you for watching this episode of the Getting Mental podcast. If you like this episode, then you'll love this one here and this one here. Check them out.